By the time the good plates were out and the roast was sweating on its platter, I already knew I wasn't going to keep my head down anymore. I had tried being harmless, and all it did was soothe everyone else while I wore myself down to a nub. That night, I promised myself I would stop swallowing my name like it was something to be ashamed of. I would let the truth stand on its own legs, even if it shook the floorboards. My name is Ethan. I fix things with my hands, doors that don't close, fences that lean like drunk old men, steps that wobble, lights that flicker. If it creaks, I listen. If it sags, I shore it. I used to write for a living. Sports blurbs, profiles, small-town festivals and barbecue cook-offs, until the paper was folded into some bigger company with a bigger mouth and they chewed most of us up. For a while, I thought the worst part was watching my byline disappear from the morning table. But it turned out the worst part was the quiet, the kind that sits in your bones, the kind that makes you wonder if anyone would notice if you just stopped trying. Lily noticed. She's the kind of woman who smells like coffee and warm dryer sheets, who talks with her hands when she's excited, who runs toward trouble with a first aid kit and a granola bar. When I lost the job, she didn't flinch. She tightened her ponytail and picked up extra shifts at the clinic. She told me to build something of my own. "You always fix things for everyone else," she said. "It's time to let that be your work." So I did what you do when you're starting over. I sold the old guitar I'd been saving for no good reason and bought a second-hand drill, picked up a sander that sounded like a swarm of bees, filled a milk crate with mismatched screws. I printed business cards at the library and left them in diners and barber shops where the grout is always a little grimy, but they call you by your name. I said yes to everything. Screen doors, loose tiles, a porch railing that had been clinging to life by its paint. I woke early, I came home late. I washed my hands in gas station bathrooms when I ran out of wipes. On nights I couldn't sleep, I lined up my tools on the table and memorized the dents like a deck of cards. I did a lot of jobs at my mother-in-law's house. Diane lives in a cul-de-sac lined with maples that go crazy in the fall, their leaves burning out in a riot of red and gold like they're daring winter to try something. Her house is a magazine spread and smells like lemon cleaner. The kitchen island is so big you'd need a map and a packed lunch to get around it. She liked to tell the neighbors she had a live-in handyman, with a laugh that edged the words just enough to remind you I didn't live there. When you're starting a business, any referral is oxygen. So I smiled and fixed her crooked shutters and her finicky disposal and the cabinet hinge that squealed like it was complaining about a lifetime of obligations. I wish I could tell you Diane is complicated, but that would be generous. She's the kind of woman who carries her expectations like they were heirlooms, and you should be honored just to dust them. She never said anything outright at first. It was always these little cuts that didn't bleed until you got home. "Ethan is between things right now," she would say in a room full of people, as if my life were a highway rest stop. Or, "He is very good with his hands," in a tone that made it sound like a consolation prize. On holidays, she'd seat me at the end of the table like I was leakage. She'd pass me the rolls last, make me hold the hot dish towel while she positioned casserole pans in a way that felt like choreography I was messing up. There were a lot of these tiny choices. The time she sent a group text with a dress code and "don't wear work boots" went only to me. When she told me to be at her house an hour later than everyone else because she didn't want to overwhelm the kitchen, but I arrived to find dessert being served. When she introduced me to her friend from church as Lily's husband, the one who is still figuring it out, and patted my arm the way you soothe a dog before the fireworks. She did it with a smile so white and polished you could see your own doubt reflected in it. I kept the peace because Lily was in the middle, like a bridge that had well-meaning traffic on both sides. My wife deserves joy like anyone else, and I had convinced myself that I was built to absorb blows, that I could take those glancing hits and store them in some closet inside me with the holiday decorations we only open once a year. My dad used to say, "Let the insults be rocks in your pocket. You'll either get used to the weight or you'll skip them across a lake someday." Maybe he meant to be poetic. All I felt was heavy. The first time Diane made me angry enough to taste it was in their backyard in early spring, when the grass was that too bright green that only lasts a week. We were setting out folding chairs. She held up one and squinted at it like it had offended her. "This is exactly why Lily should have married someone stable," she said, not looking at me. "Someone who could make sure nothing in her life ever looks like this." I asked her what she meant by this. She gave me that smile. "Temporary. Wobbly, you know." I carried the chairs to the patio and stacked them gently, and when I went to the bathroom, I stood at the sink and stared at my face in the mirror long enough to fog it with my breath. That was when I started recording things. Not because I thought I'd need proof, but because hearing the words outside my head made them real. And sometimes truth needs to be seen before it can be handled. I bought nothing fancy. I just used the voice recorder app on my beat-up phone and pressed the button when she began her thing, the way you might press a finger to your own pulse to make sure you're still there. The first recording is birds, and the hum of a neighbor's lawnmower and Diane saying, "Don't take this the wrong way," in a tone that guarantees you will. She went on, "You know the script," and the words, "men like you," floated in a way that smelled like gasoline. I didn't plan to use it for anything. I certainly didn't imagine playing it later for the people who sit on both sides of my life. I recorded because I wanted to stop gaslighting myself, because every time someone told me she didn't mean it, or it's just her way, a little part of me shifted the blame like a slow landslide. I needed a place where the truth sat undisturbed. The summer ran on, and my business started to get traction. A neighbor told a friend who told a cousin, and I found myself moving from porch to porch, replacing rotted boards, rebuilding faces of houses like they were shy kids learning to look you in the eye. I started sleeping better. The heavy quiet lost a little of its grip, but Diane didn't change. The better I did, the sharper she got. She made me feel like a man carrying a full glass across a bumpy lawn. One wrong step and you're wet with it. There was the day she called me to fix a little drip that turned out to be an under-sink nightmare eating away at the cabinet floor. I wore my worn jeans and a shirt I didn't mind ruining, and when I scooted out from under the sink, sweating and dirty and proud I'd stopped the leak, she wrinkled her nose. "Do try to clean up before Lily gets home. She works so hard it's a shame to come home to a mess." There was the family photo where she insisted we do just one more shot, and then, "Just the original family, please." Then, "Just the women." And then, "Oh, Ethan, would you mind taking the picture?" I watched my own wife laugh with her mother and sister and aunts, framed by a backyard Diane had curated like a museum exhibit, and I felt like an extra hired to hold a prop. It's incredible the tricks your brain pulls on you to keep you in line with what people expect. I started apologizing for things that hadn't happened yet. I tucked my shoulders in when I walked into a room. At night, I lay in bed and listened to the way Lily breathed beside me and counted the seconds I could make my chest stay still, trying to disappear without moving. When the invitation for the big family dinner came, it looked harmless. Her father's birthday, a whole brood of cousins, potluck sides, bring your signature dish. I'm not much of a cook, but I make a mean cornbread that tastes like summer and a cast iron skillet. I texted back, "We'll be there. Can't wait." Diane sent me a thumbs up and to Lily separately. "Please remind Ethan not to mention his business. We don't want to make the evening about him." Something in me that had been quietly absorbing these chips and cracks finally sighed and set down the load. That morning, I set the phone to record as a matter of habit and slid it into my shirt pocket. We arrived to the smell of roast and rosemary, the table set with those plates that only come out when you want to impress someone who forgets to be impressed. The windows were open, and the breeze had that neighborly sound of wind chimes and someone singing along to classic rock. People hugged Lily, kissed her cheek. I shook hands and got a "Hey man" and a "You clean up well" like compliments you toss across a parking lot. Diane glided from kitchen to table and back, stirring, checking, correcting, arranging, her bracelets whispering. She kissed Lily, she patted me, and when she leaned close, she told me quietly, "Remember not to hog the conversation with your projects." "We want to keep it classy tonight," I said. "We're celebrating your husband. I wouldn't dream of making it about me." She smiled with all her teeth and pinched my forearm like you do a child you're trying to keep from bolting into traffic. As people sat down, as water glasses filled, as napkins were shaken into laps, Diane raised her glass and delivered one of her practiced toasts. Her husband smiled at the compliments, shrugging off the attention like a sweater he was comfortable in. When the clink of glasses died down, there was that quiet that means the evening is choosing a direction. Lily reached for my hand under the table and squeezed. We had talked about boundaries. We had talked about not letting her mother drag me into a drama that would leave us both scraped. "Eyes on me," she had said earlier, as I buttoned my shirt and tried to brush sawdust out of a collar that had known better days. "It's me and you, that's the map." I nodded and watched my mother-in-law watch us. She smiled and then did the thing she does when she wants to help you fall into a hole of her digging. She asked me how my little jobs were going. I told her I'd been busy, grateful for the work. That I'd built a bench for Mr. Rourke down the street, fixed the steps for Mrs. Hines so she stopped stubbing her toe on the way to her garden. I kept it simple. I kept it small. I didn't bring up the fact that last week someone asked me to bid on a grocery store remodel, that the foreman had called me reliable. I didn't mention the part of me that was beginning to believe I might actually be building something that would last past the season. She let my words hang between us like damp laundry. Then she tilted her head and said in a tone of gentle regret that carries more bite than any shout, "Are you ever going to become something, Ethan? Or is this it?" People looked at their plates. The fork in my hand suddenly felt like a heavy instrument. I saw Lily's jaw tighten like a hand pulling down a shade. I swallowed. "I am something," I said. "I'm Lily's husband. And I fix things." It was not witty. It was true. I thought that might be enough. She smiled like I had told a joke at my own expense. "Sweetheart, that's not what I meant." I felt the first lick of real anger then, the kind that warms you rather than burns you. I didn't want a scene. I wanted to be able to drive home and talk about ordinary things, to fall asleep with my feet touching Lily's and wake up without gravel in my chest. So I said, "Let's just eat." Diane didn't stop. Of course she didn't. "It's just that Lily has always had potential," she said, "and perhaps if you had drive. And some men are providers." And she did it all with the softness of someone explaining the weather to a child who wants it to snow. And then, because the evening was determined to show me a line and force me to choose a side, she leaned in with a smile that felt like the sharp edge of a paper cut and said, clear enough for people near us to hear, "My mother-in-law called me a loser at dinner. I recorded everything. I played it in front of everyone." No, that's not how it unfolded. It came in pieces. She said, "You know, some people are just," and made a flicking motion with her hand, "losers." It wasn't a joke. It was a diagnosis. She looked at me as she said it. I don't remember deciding. I only remember my thumb finding the right button in my pocket, my phone warming in my hand. My heart knocked on my ribs like it wanted out and fast. Lily squeezed my knee. Our eyes met. She nodded, just once, like this road had always been waiting and we were finally ready to drive it. Here's where the cover and the title of this story belong, in the center where there's no running from it. My mother-in-law called me a loser at dinner. I had recorded it, and I played it in front of everyone. It wasn't just that one line. The recording started with her voice in the kitchen from earlier that evening, when I brought the cornbread, and she took it from my hands and lowered her voice so it would sting better. You can hear the hum of the refrigerator and the clink of the spoon in the gravy boat. You can hear me try to laugh something off like I'm tossing scraps to the dogs under the table. You can hear her say, "Don't talk about your little business," followed by a tut that sounds like a nail tapping a wine glass. Then you hear the backyard conversation from last spring, chairs scraping on concrete, birds going about their day while she says, "Temporary, wobbly." There's the group text she thought she sent just to Lily but sent to me by accident, with the line, "Make sure his shirt doesn't have that smell." There's the moment she timed my arrival wrong and then said, "Oh, you missed the prayer," in a tone that tasted like copper. I had stitched it responsibly, not to humiliate her with edits, but to show the river as it had run. Her words, whole and untrimmed, a chain that clinked all on its own. The sound filled the dining room like fog. People's faces did the little micro-dances of shock. Eyebrows lifted, eyes widening, lips pulling back. That human choreography you only see when truth is taking attendance. Diane's face went through a whole weather system of looks. Amusement, confusion, the first cool breeze of panic. She reached for the phone and I pulled it back. "Don't," I said softly. "You don't get to erase this." Her husband, Peter, cleared his throat. He's a kind man who learned to make peace by smoothing every rough place with silence. He put his hand on the table, palm down, like he was steadying the whole structure. "Diane," he said, and I had never heard my name used so many times in other people's conversations until that night. "What is this?" She laughed without humor. "This is manipulation. This is creepy." She looked around the table like a magician waiting for the assistants to reappear and save the trick. "He's been recording me. Can you believe that? In my home? This is what I've been dealing with." Lily didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I believe it," she said, "because I've been telling you for years that your words cut him, and you always said we were too sensitive." Years. That word unspooled inside me like ribbon. You never know how long a thing has been happening until you put a line in the sand and measure the tide against it. I hadn't meant to make an exhibit. I hadn't meant to make a show of anything. I just wanted not to feel crazy. The room shifted. One of Diane's sisters spoke up. "I remember you said something at the shower," she muttered, almost to herself, "about how some men are more ambitious." She blinked as if she was turning a memory in her hand like a pebble that suddenly feels sharper. I let it slide. I shouldn't have. "Enough," Diane said, and I could hear the thread of panic there now. The first real wobble in her voice that hadn't been intentionally curated. "This is not..." She stood up and her chair skidded back, its legs scraping like a bad thought. "I will not be made the villain at my own table." I didn't say she was. I didn't have to. Her words were sitting there on a platter, steaming with their own heat. Peter stood too. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her like someone who had been squinting a long time and suddenly found his glasses. "I have been asking myself if I've been missing something," he said. "I think I have." Diane was not a person accustomed to being cornered. She tried every door. She sighed. She smiled. She softened her eyes. "You know I love you, Ethan," she said. "You know I want the best for Lily. Maybe I've pushed too hard." She reached for her napkin and smoothed it like she could press this moment flat. "I do everything for this family. I host, I plan. I make it look nice so you don't have to be embarrassed of..." She stopped herself, but the sentence had already introduced itself. I looked at the bowl of beans, at the shining roast, at the cornbread someone had cut a corner out of already because they couldn't wait. I thought of my dad skipping rocks across a lake and me counting how many times they hopped before they sank. I thought of the weight in my pocket and the relief of setting it down. "Embarrassed of who?" I asked quietly. "Of Messi," she said. And then the truth showed up behind her eyes and she couldn't lock it away. "Of you." There it was, clean, undeniable, like a bone-set wrong finally being snapped back into place. It wasn't about my job or my boots or my gifts. It was about me. And I had been asking her to like me with everything I could possibly change about myself, while the thing she didn't like was the only part I couldn't. Every story like this deserves a turning point that looks small from the outside. Mine is this. I didn't go cold. I didn't go loud. I didn't roast her with some speech I'd been crafting in the shower. I turned to Lily. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have made you my shelter sooner." Lily's eyes filled, but she didn't let a single tear fall. "We're here now," she said. She took my hand and then turned to her mother. "We are done. No more jokes. No more little cuts. If you want to be in our life, you will respect my husband and me." You could feel the tectonic plates of the family shifting under the tablecloth. Someone's fork scraped porcelain. The wind outside rattled the wind chimes like nervous laughter. And in the kind of quiet that parts the air like a curtain, Diane did something I didn't expect. She sat back down. The movement looked like a concession and a collapse all at once. I watched her fight with herself. I watched a dozen learned tendencies: deflect, charm, instruct, shame, rise and fall in the space of a breath. And then she said, in a voice that didn't have a single ribbon on it, "I'm sorry." Not the kind of sorry you say over a bumped elbow. The kind that comes out tasting like metal because it's dragging pride behind it. She looked at me, not around me, not through me, at me. "I have been cruel because I have been afraid," she said, "of you leaving her with the weight I have carried, of watching my daughter struggle. I wanted to scare you into becoming a man I could trust. I see now that I have become the one you can't." People sat back in their chairs. The room exhaled. Peter's hand drifted toward his wife's, then stopped, then kept going. He covered her fingers like you cup a bird. He didn't rescue her from the truth. He held onto it with her. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. The words stumbled, but they found their footing. "But I am asking for it anyway. I don't know how other people are built, but I am not a vindictive man by nature. I can sharpen when I have to, sure, but my daily habit is to try to round off the corners. I thought about all those little cuts stacked on top of each other like paper that can slice when there's enough of it. I thought about Lily, my wife, the map. I thought about the part of me that wanted to leave, to wrench free and go eat fast food in the truck with the radio loud enough to drown the beating in my ears. And then I thought about what justice feels like when it's not out to humiliate, but to correct. I can forgive you, I said, but I won't forget and I won't let it start again. This house does not get to operate like a minefield. If you feel something, you say it straight and you say it kindly, or you do not say it at all. We are not your project. We are a family. And if you can't figure out how to treat us like one, we will build our own without you. If there is a moral here, it's not that recordings fix everything. It's not that public shame is a magic wand. It's that there are some people who need to hear themselves to understand what they've been saying. It's that dignity is not a hat you wear to dinner. It's the posture of your heart when you are certain you belong. We ate, in the end. The roast was still warm. The beans were a little oversalted. Someone made a joke about Peter's candle count, and he laughed and said he'd earned every line and wrinkle in his face and the right to nap without warning. The conversation staggered like a runner who tripped and then found their stride again. It wasn't perfect. No one toasted. But the air had changed. It had the quality of a room that's been aired out after a long winter of stale quiet. On the drive home, Lily put her feet on the dash and let the wind tease loose strands of hair. We didn't talk at first. The sky was the deep kind of navy that makes you think about the ocean even if you're nowhere near it. Finally, she said, "I should have handled my mother sooner." "You did fine," I said. "We did fine." And she asked for forgiveness. "She did," Lily said, like she was still rolling the words around in her mouth to test them for chips. "Do you forgive her?" "I do," I said, "and I will again tomorrow if I have to. But the rules changed. That's on us to enforce." I expected distance. I expected awkwardness. What I didn't expect was the way the family rearranged itself, like furniture moved to let the light in. Diane sent a text the next day that was actually an apology, and not a poem about nothing. She started the message with my name, and the word sorry came before any explanation. She asked if she could come by the house to talk, and when she did, she looked around at the scuffed floors and the couch with a stain we still can't identify, and she said, "It's beautiful in here," and I believed she meant it. I sat on my side of the couch and she sat on the other, and we talked like two people learning a language late in life, slow, careful, grateful for patience. She asked me about the jobs I liked most. I told her about Mr. Rourke and the way he cried when he realized he could sit on his porch again without worrying the step would give. I told her about the way old houses talk back if you listen. I told her that sometimes I feel like I'm taking care of people whose children live far away, that a new railing can be as good as a hug. She listened without glancing at the clock. At one point, she tried to give me advice about marketing, and then stopped herself and laughed. "I don't know anything about your world," she said. "But if you want my help with spreadsheets, I am a terror with spreadsheets." We ended up agreeing on what boundaries look like. We used the word boundaries without choking on it. She apologized to Lily for making our home feel unsafe. She apologized to me for the names she had put in the air and expected us to breathe. It wasn't all cleaned up by then. There were backslides, there always are. But she kept showing up with the right kind of effort. That winter, I got the grocery store remodel. I hired a couple of guys with steady hands and the same quiet pride I have in a job done right. We wore shirts with our names stitched on them, and people brought us coffee in mismatched mugs, and I left every site cleaner than I found it. Money showed up slow, then steadier. I started sleeping even better. When the first snow fell, I stood on our porch with a mug of cocoa and watched the light from the street lamp turn the flakes into sparks. The next time we had dinner at Diane's, things were different in small ways that added up. She didn't hover behind me at the sink to correct how I washed a dish. She didn't pull the bowl out of my hands and redo it with a sigh. She asked me about my week and didn't use the word little. When she asked for help hanging a heavy mirror in the hallway, she said please and thank you. And then she stood back and told me it looked like it belonged there. It was not lost on me that I was hanging a thing meant to reflect, in a house that had taught me how harsh that could be. The glass caught our faces, and for once it didn't skew. Near the end of the night, when the table was cluttered with plates and laughter, Diane stood and cleared her throat. "I owe you all something," she said to the room. She didn't hold a glass or a prop. She just put her palm flat on the table the way Peter had done before, like she was learning his trick for steadying a thing about to fall. "I owe you words that build instead of break. I cannot promise to be perfect. I can promise to be kinder. And if you catch me slipping, you have my permission to press pause and play back what I said so I can hear it." I looked down at my hands. The calluses at the base of my fingers were a sort of map too, places where I had met friction and learned how to move anyway. I felt something uncoil in my chest that had been stuffed in there so long it had learned to make a home. It stretched and yawned. It breathed. On the way out, she hugged me, not the short, stiff kind. She held on long enough that I felt the tremor in her ribs. "Thank you," she said into my shoulder, "for not giving up on me even when I was trying to make you let go." In the truck, Lily leaned over the console and kissed my cheek. "You did that," she whispered. "You changed the weather." "I just hit play," I said. The rest of it was her work, the hard part. Lily smiled and rested her head against the window, watching streetlights blink by like lazy fireflies. "Maybe that's all karma is sometimes," she said. "Not lightning from the sky, just a mirror at the right angle." I thought about that, about mirrors and recordings, and all the ways we try to hold truth still long enough to look at it. I thought about the first day I had recorded something, just so I wouldn't feel like a man walking through a funhouse of twisted reflections. I thought about the night I pressed a button and let everyone in the room hear the words that had only been cutting me in the dark. If I were to write a headline for my own life after that point, it wouldn't be about revenge, not really. It would be about restoration, about a man who built a bench for someone else and then finally sat down on it himself, about a family that learned to stop using love as a measuring stick and started using it as a blanket. In the months that followed, my phone stayed in my pocket, tucked away next to my wallet and a pencil that's sharpened down to a little stub. I didn't need it. The house we were building didn't creak like that anymore. When I walked into Diane's kitchen, the air smelled like cinnamon and a little bit of hope. She'd hand me a dish to carry and call me by my name with no side dishes attached. And sometimes when she did slip up, and she did because habits are like weeds, we would pause. She would close her eyes and start again. She would ask for forgiveness, right there, without the theatrics. And I could give it because she was learning not to ask me to be anyone else. At night, Lily and I lay in bed and planned things. A little garden, a new mail slot that doesn't chew up magazines, a woodshop bench in the garage with holes for pegs, and a place to clamp timber so I can carve without chasing it across the floor. The future didn't feel like a room I wasn't invited into. It felt like a house I knew how to build, the The next time my phone sang with a client asking for help, I smiled at the name and answered with sawdust still under my nails. "Sure," I said. "I'm your guy." I hung up and looked at Lily. She was grinning, feet tucked under her, hair a little wild. "You are," she said. She said it like a simple truth, the kind that holds steady even when other things feel shaky. Some people will tell you revenge tastes sweet. Maybe they've never tried forgiveness when it's earned. That's the flavor that surprised me. Not the sugar rush of someone getting theirs, but the steady warmth of someone getting it. If karma was working that night at the dinner table, it wasn't because I'd schemed or set a trap. It was because the words she meant to weaponize circled back and sat beside her, asking to be fed. And when she realized they weren't hungry for me, they were hungry for her honesty, everything began to change. I still fix things. Doors, steps, hearts, sometimes. My hands are always a little banged up, and so is my faith in people. But the scars map where I've been, and the smooth places show where I've learned. When I walk up to Diane's now, she meets me at the door. She doesn't make me ring the bell. The dog no longer barks at me like I'm a stranger. And when the wind chimes rattle, the sound doesn't make me brace. It sounds like what it is, the air moving through something small and stubborn and made to make music, no matter the weather. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.